My name is Mia Harrison, 29, former VP of Operations at Harrison Home Construction. I was sipping my latte when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "You're out of the family business, Mia. Don't call back." 7 years of 70-hour weeks, millions in new contracts, my entire identity, gone in 15 seconds. My hands trembled, but my face remained expressionless as other customers chatted around me. I set my phone down, took a breath, and typed one word in response: understood. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like button and subscribe to join me on this journey of betrayal and rebuilding. Harrison Home Construction wasn't just a company to me. It was my inheritance, my future, and my home. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I practically breathed sawdust and blueprint paper from the moment I could walk. Dad, Mark Harrison, started the business 35 years ago with nothing but a pickup truck, a toolbox, and an unrelenting work ethic. Mom always said he had concrete in his veins instead of blood. Some of my earliest memories are of Dad hoisting me onto his shoulders at construction sites, pointing out framing and foundation work. "See how it all starts, Mia? Everything needs a solid foundation." By age 10, I could read blueprints. By 14, I was helping with the accounting during summer breaks. The business was in my DNA. When college application time came around, there was never really a question about my path. I attended the University of Oregon, double majoring in business administration and sustainable building design. I graduated summa cum laude, gave the student commencement speech, and had job offers from 3 national construction firms before I even threw my cap. My father acted surprised when I told him I was turning them all down to join Harrison Home Construction, but the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. "Are you sure, Mia? Those are impressive offers." But we both knew where I belonged. I started in project management, deliberately avoiding any hint of nepotism. I worked harder than anyone, arriving before dawn and leaving well after dark. The crews respected me not because I was the boss's daughter, but because I knew what I was talking about and never asked anyone to do something I wouldn't do myself. When I pointed out inefficiencies in our supply chain that were costing us thousands, Dad promoted me to operations manager. By 27, I was vice president of operations, and Harrison Home Construction had expanded from residential projects to commercial buildings across 3 states. Our revenue had doubled in the 5 years since I joined full-time. My innovative approaches to project management and my push for sustainable building practices had positioned us as industry leaders in the Pacific Northwest. My family dynamics were more complicated. Mom, Grace Harrison, was always supportive but preferred to stay in the background. She managed the home front while Dad built the empire, and she rarely voiced opinions about business matters. She was proud of me, certainly, but she also seemed worried about my total dedication to the company. Then there was my brother Ethan, 3 years older but somehow always a step behind. He had the Harrison name and my father's square jaw, but none of his drive. Ethan worked in sales, and while he was charismatic enough to bring in clients, he lacked follow-through. I often had to clean up his messes, promises made that our teams couldn't reasonably deliver, quotes given without consulting with engineering first. Yet Dad had a soft spot for him. "He'll grow into it," Dad would say. "Not everyone hits the ground running like you did, Mia." Despite Ethan's shortcomings, Dad had always been clear: someday this will all be yours and your brother's. Equal partners. A Harrison legacy. I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? I dedicated my life to ensuring that legacy would thrive. Last year, we broke ground on our most ambitious project yet, a mixed-use development in downtown Portland focused on sustainable urban living. It was largely my vision: apartment units above retail spaces, all constructed with locally sourced materials, solar panels, rainwater collection systems, and communal green spaces. The Harrison West Side Commons would be our flagship achievement, the project that would cement our reputation as forward-thinking builders. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Dad handed me the golden shovel. "This one's your baby, Mia," he said for all to hear. The future of Harrison Construction. I remember the weight of that shovel, how right it felt in my hands, how clear my path forward seemed. That night, at the celebration dinner, Dad raised a toast to Mia, who sees not just what buildings can be, but what they should be. Everyone applauded. Even Ethan smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. How could I have known then that within 6 months, I'd be standing in a coffee shop, staring at my phone, locked out of the future I'd helped build? The foundation I thought was solid had fault lines I never detected, and they were about to crack wide open. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things began to shift, though at the time the changes were subtle enough to dismiss. It started about 3 months before that fateful voicemail during our quarterly planning meeting. I'd prepared an extensive presentation on expanding our eco-friendly materials usage across all projects. The numbers supported it. Our sustainable builds were commanding premium prices and generating positive press. But when I pulled up the slides, Dad glanced at his watch. "Let's table this for now, Mia. We've got more pressing matters." He never specified what those matters were. That same week, I noticed Dad and Ethan having lunch together, not unusual in itself, but these lunches became daily occurrences. They'd stop talking when I approached their table. "Just some father-son catch-up," Dad would say with a dismissive wave. Then came the introduction of Richard Maxwell, my father's old college roommate, and a semi-retired executive from a national construction corporation. Dad brought him in as a strategic consultant without discussing it with me first. "Richard's got 40 years in the business," Dad explained when I questioned the decision. "He'll help us navigate this expansion phase." Maxwell was tall, silver-haired, and had the forced joviality of someone who laughed at his own jokes. He made himself at home in our offices, reviewing our contracts, examining our processes, and asking pointed questions about our client relationships. When I asked to see his reports, Dad told me they were still in development. I started noticing small decisions being reversed. A sustainable materials vendor I'd vetted and approved was suddenly dropped. A project manager I'd hired was reassigned. The marketing campaign I'd developed for Harrison Westside Commons was temporarily shelved. Each time I sought explanations, I received vague responses. "We're reassessing." "It's a timing issue. We'll circle back to that." One Tuesday afternoon, I walked into the conference room to find my father, Ethan, Richard, and 2 board members in a meeting I hadn't been informed about. They had blueprints spread across the table, modifications to the West Side Commons design that eliminated many of the sustainability features. "What's going on here?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Dad looked up, momentarily startled. "Just exploring some value engineering options. Nothing final." "Value engineering? We're cutting the solar array and the rainwater system? These are cornerstone features of the design. The city approved our permits based on these elements." Richard Maxwell cleared his throat. The initial estimates were perhaps overly optimistic about ROI on these features. "We're simply recalibrating to market realities." "I ran those numbers myself," I countered. "They're solid. And we've already ordered materials." Dad stood up. "Mia, we can discuss this later. Richard has some insights worth considering." I felt the room close in on me. These weren't minor tweaks. This was a fundamental shift away from the vision I'd created and everyone had approved. And I was being excluded from the conversation. That evening, my assistant Jessica asked to speak with me privately. We walked to a nearby park, away from the office. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she said, glancing around as if worried about being overheard, "but they've been having meetings, your dad, Ethan, and Mr. Maxwell, almost every day when you're out visiting sites. And Mr. Maxwell's son Connor has been in twice for interviews." "Interviews? For what position?" Jessica looked uncomfortable. "They didn't say specifically, but they were showing him around like he was already hired." "Your office was part of the tour." I tried to rationalize. Perhaps they were bringing in additional management for the expansion. But why the secrecy? Why not include me in these discussions? That weekend, I stopped by my parents' house for our monthly family dinner. Mom seemed distracted, checking her phone frequently. When Dad stepped out to take a call, she leaned close to me. "Mia, be careful," she whispered. "What do you mean, Mom?" "Just watch your back. Your father's, he's not thinking clearly lately." Before she could elaborate, Dad returned, and she immediately changed the subject to her garden club. I tried to catch her alone again that evening, but she avoided being alone with me. As I was leaving, she hugged me tighter than usual, like she was saying goodbye rather than see you soon. The following week, I was explicitly excluded from a business dinner with a major potential client. When I asked Dad why, he claimed it was just a casual meeting, nothing official. Later I discovered they had signed a preliminary agreement for a luxury condo development, a project type I had specifically advised against due to market saturation. Each incident in isolation could be explained away. Together, they formed a pattern I was finally beginning to recognize. Something was happening at Harrison Home Construction, something that apparently didn't include me. But even with these warning signs, I never imagined how quickly and completely the axe would fall. April 17th began like any other Tuesday. Spring in Portland meant rain, but the sky had cleared enough for sunlight to break through the clouds as I drove to our newest site. I was meeting with Greenfield developers, a client interested in a significant commercial project that aligned perfectly with our sustainable building focus. I'd spent the previous week preparing comprehensive proposals and running cost projections. This could be our largest contract yet, a campus of office buildings designed to lead platinum standards. The meeting went exceptionally well. Martin Greenfield, the CEO, seemed impressed by the innovative approaches I'd suggested. "Your passion for sustainable building is exactly what we're looking for, Mia," he said as we shook hands. "I think Harrison is the right partner for us." I called the office immediately afterward, but got my father's voicemail. I left an excited message about the potential new contract, then decided to treat myself to coffee before heading back. I deserved a small celebration. This deal would add millions to our annual revenue and create jobs for dozens of workers. The coffee shop was busy with the mid-morning rush. I ordered my usual, a large latte with an extra shot, and found a quiet corner table near the window. Rain had started again, pattering against the glass. I pulled out my tablet to review some emails while I waited for my drink. My phone buzzed. Dad's name appeared on the screen. Perfect timing. I was eager to share the good news about Greenfield. But instead of answering, the call went straight to voicemail. Odd. I picked up my phone to call back when the voicemail notification appeared. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear, still smiling from the successful meeting. "Mia." My father's voice was flat, businesslike. "No greeting." "The board met this morning and we've decided to restructure the company leadership. Effective immediately, you're out of the family business. Your access has been revoked and your position has been filled. Don't come to the office. Don't call back. Your personal items will be delivered to your apartment. This is a final decision." The message ended. No explanation. No goodbye. Just the mechanical voice asking if I wanted to save or delete the message. I sat frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The barista called my name, but it sounded distant, underwater. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the screen as if it might offer some explanation that the message had not. My mind raced through possible scenarios. Was this a joke? A mistake? Had my father's phone been stolen? But I knew his voice. The deliberate, measured tone he used when decisions were non-negotiable. I felt a physical pain in my chest, like someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart. My breathing became shallow. Around me, people continued their conversations. Laptops clicked, espresso machines hissed, the world continuing in its routine while mine imploded. The barista called my name again, more insistently this time. I stood on unsteady legs and collected my drink, thanking her automatically. Back at my table, I set the untouched latte down and stared at my phone. What does one say to being discarded? To having your life's work, your future, your identity stripped away in a 15-second voicemail? I could call and demand explanations. I could drive to the office and make a scene. I could cry, scream, beg. Instead, I opened my messaging app. I typed a single word and hit send. Understood. Then I gathered my things, left my untouched coffee on the table, and walked out into the rain. I drove aimlessly for hours. My route took me past buildings I'd helped create. The Miller offices with their distinctive curved facade. The renovated Parkside apartments that had won us a design award. The elementary school we'd rebuilt after the fire, completed ahead of schedule so kids could return to familiar classrooms. Each building was a chapter of my story, physical manifestations of my dedication and vision. Now they stood as monuments to what I'd lost. Eventually, I found myself parked outside my apartment building, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and tall windows. I'd chosen it for its proximity to the office. 15 minutes door to door. What did proximity matter now? Inside, my apartment felt suddenly alien. Photos of family gatherings on the bookshelf. The model of our first commercial project Dad had given me when we won the bid. The hard hat with Harrison printed on the side that I'd worn on countless sites. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony as darkness fell over Portland. Lights flickered on across the city. Homes and businesses where people were finishing their normal Tuesday, unaware that Mia Harrison's world had just collapsed. My phone remained silent. No calls from Mom. No texts from colleagues wondering where I'd disappeared to. Nothing. Just that devastating voicemail and my one-word response floating in digital space between my father and me. Understood. Not why. Not how could you. Not please reconsider. Just acknowledgement. Acceptance. Because in that moment of shock and betrayal, it was the only power I had left, the power to deny him the satisfaction of my pleading or my anger. I slept fitfully that night, waking frequently to check my phone, half convinced it had all been a nightmare. But morning came, and reality remained unchanged. I was out. With no warning, no conversation, no chance to defend myself. Just cut off like a gangrenous limb from the Harrison family body. The days following the voicemail blurred together. I woke the next morning with a momentary amnesia, reaching for my phone to check work emails before the reality crashed back. Out of habit, I tried to log into the company system anyway. Access denied flashed on the screen. My company credit card was declined when I tried to buy coffee. My key card wouldn't open the office building doors. It was as if someone had systematically erased my professional existence overnight. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from confused clients and colleagues. Martin Greenfield from yesterday's meeting. Mia, I'm hearing strange things. Call me. Suppliers we'd built relationships with. Is it true you've left Harrison? Project managers looking for direction on ongoing work. I couldn't bring myself to answer. What would I say? That I'd been fired by a voicemail? That I had no idea why? That after 7 years of dedication, I'd been discarded without explanation? On the third day, when I still hadn't heard from a single family member, I called Mom. Straight to voicemail. I tried the house phone. No answer. I even tried Ethan, though we'd never been close. Nothing. It was as if I'd died and no one had bothered with a funeral. By day 5, I was desperate for information. I texted Jessica, asking if she could meet me. We arranged to meet at a diner across town, far from the office. She arrived looking nervous, glancing over her shoulder as she slid into the booth. I'm not supposed to be talking to you, she said immediately. They made everyone sign non-disclosure agreements about the transition. Jessica, what happened? I need to know. She fidgeted with her napkin. It all happened so fast. Monday afternoon, after you left for the Greenfield meeting, they called an all-hands. Your father announced that the company was returning to its roots and focusing on luxury residential development. Then he introduced Connor Maxwell as the new VP of Operations. Maxwell's son. The pieces started clicking into place. Yes. Apparently, he's been shadowing different departments for weeks. Then your father said you decided to pursue other opportunities and that all communication should go through Connor or Ethan from now on. That's a lie. I was fired by voicemail after the most successful client meeting of my career. Jessica looked pained. There's more, Mia. They're systematically dismantling everything you built. The sustainability initiatives, the community partnerships, the diverse hiring practices all being rolled back. The West Side Commons has been completely redesigned. No green features, just luxury condos with premium price tags. I felt physically ill. But why? Those initiatives were profitable. They differentiated us in the market. Richard Maxwell convinced your father that luxury development is where the quick money is. Less regulation, higher margins. She hesitated. And there's something about your father's health. I overheard him talking about treatments. Dad's sick? Why wouldn't he tell me? I don't know details. Just that he's been having private conversations about medical options. As Jessica continued filling in the blanks, the full picture emerged. Richard Maxwell had orchestrated a complete company takeover from within, positioning his son as my replacement. My brother Ethan, always jealous of my closer relationship with the crews and my performance record, had allied with them. Together, they'd convinced my father that the company needed to change direction, away from my vision of sustainable, community-focused construction back to luxury projects with quick returns. One more thing, Jessica said quietly. When I came in yesterday, your office was completely cleared out. They had a courier service deliver boxes to your apartment building. Did you get them? I hadn't. When I returned home, I checked with my doorman. Sure enough, 4 large boxes had been delivered that morning. I carried them up one by one, feeling like I was transporting pieces of a corpse. Inside were the artifacts of my professional life. Family photos. Industry awards. The plant I'd kept alive for 5 years. My degrees removed from the wall. Client thank you notes. All packed haphazardly, some frames cracked, the plant's soil spilled throughout. At the bottom of the last box was a legal document. A separation agreement waiving all claims against Harrison Home Construction in exchange for 3 months severance pay. A yellow sticky note in my father's handwriting. Sign and return for payment. I let the paper fall from my hands. That evening, I started my investigation in earnest. I called a former classmate who worked at a competing construction firm. Have you heard anything about Harrison Construction recently? Actually, yes. Word is they're pivoting hard to luxury development. And there are rumors about financial trouble. They're trying to secure major funding for something. Someone said your dad has been looking to sell controlling interest. This was news to me. Our finances had been solid. I'd reviewed the books myself just weeks ago. I created a timeline of events, working backward from the voicemail. The arrival of Richard Maxwell. The secretive meetings. The gradual sidelining of my projects. The introduction of Connor. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was a calculated coup that had been in motion for months, while I worked obliviously to grow the company. The most painful revelation came when I accessed my personal email and found messages from clients expressing confusion about changes I'd supposedly authorized. Contracts had been modified. Promises walked back. My name used to justify decisions I never made. They hadn't just removed me. They'd weaponized my reputation to dismantle everything I'd built. I consulted with an attorney, Samantha Reed, who specialized in family business disputes. After reviewing my situation, she delivered a harsh reality check. When you joined the company, did you sign any employment contracts? Shareholder agreements? Operating documents? I had, of course. Standard paperwork. These documents, she said, pointing to specific clauses, effectively limit your recourse. You agreed that the board, which your father controls, has sole discretion over operations and personnel. You have no guaranteed position, despite being family. And this non-compete clause prevents you from working with any Harrison clients for 2 years. But there must be something: wrongful termination, defamation. Family businesses operate in gray areas, Mia. They counted on your trust, and unfortunately, you gave it to them completely. Legally, your options are limited. I left her office feeling defeated. Not only had I lost my job and my family in one blow, but I'd unknowingly signed away my right to fight back. 2 weeks after the voicemail, I reached my breaking point. No communication from anyone in my family. Rumors spreading through the industry about my departure. Clients I'd nurtured relationships with for years now unreachable. I decided direct confrontation was my only option. I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday evening family dinner night for as long as I could remember. As I approached, I saw cars in the driveway. My father's Range Rover, my mother's Volvo, Ethan's Audi, and 2 unfamiliar vehicles, one likely belonging to Richard Maxwell. They were having family dinner without me. I parked across the street and sat watching the house. Through the dining room windows, I could see them gathered around the table. Mom passing dishes. Dad at the head of the table where he always sat. Ethan gesturing as he spoke. And there were the Maxwells, Richard, and a younger man who must be Connor, my replacement. They were laughing, eating, existing as if I'd never been part of their lives. I almost stormed in, almost pounded on the door demanding answers. But something stopped me. A strange calm settled over me as I watched this tableau of betrayal. They had made their choice. Creating a scene wouldn't change that. I started the car and drove away, my resolve hardening with each mile. The next day, I received a text from my mother. Coffee tomorrow? Just us. We met at a small cafe far from both the Harrison offices and my parents' home. Mom looked tired, older somehow. When she hugged me, she held on longer than usual. "I'm so sorry, Mia," she said once we were seated. "This isn't what I wanted." "Then why is it happening? Why didn't you warn me?" She glanced around nervously. "Your father isn't well. His heart. The doctors found blockages, severe ones. He needs surgery, and the recovery will be lengthy." He started panicking about the company's future. And that meant cutting me out completely? Mom, that makes no sense. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Richard convinced him that you were planning your own takeover. That you'd use his illness as an opportunity to push Ethan out completely. That's absurd. I've never. Richard had evidence, Mia. Emails, meeting notes, conversations with clients about new leadership when your father stepped down. I was speechless. Those were succession planning discussions Dad asked me to have. He told me to start preparing for a transition in the next 5 years. Richard presented it differently. And your brother. She trailed off. Ethan helped them, didn't he? He's always resented that Dad trusted me with operations instead of him. Mom didn't deny it. Richard offered a solution. His son Connor could step in during your father's recovery, with Ethan handling client relationships. A return to family values was how Richard phrased it. And what about me? I am family. Your father thinks you've changed, Mia. All the sustainability focus, the community projects. He says it's not what Harrison Construction was built for. Richard convinced him you were turning his company into something he wouldn't recognize. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. My father had been manipulated using my own initiatives against me, painting me as disloyal for trying to evolve the company. And rather than talking to me directly, he'd chosen to believe the worst and discard me without a word. Why a voicemail, Mom? After everything I've given to the company, to this family, why couldn't he even tell me to my face? She looked away. He was afraid you'd talk him out of it. You've always been persuasive, Mia. He couldn't risk facing you directly. As our conversation continued, I learned that Ethan had been systematically undermining me for months, collecting out-of-context statements, twisting my words in reports to our father. Richard Maxwell had manufactured evidence suggesting I was secretly planning to start my own company and take Harrison clients with me. The final straw was when Richard showed your father an email where you supposedly discussed moving client relationships away from Harrison. Your father saw it as the ultimate betrayal. That email doesn't exist, Mom. It's fabricated. I believe you. But your father doesn't. Or won't. He's scared, Mia. Facing mortality does strange things to people. We parted with another long hug. I'll try to talk to him, she promised, when he's stronger after the surgery. But we both knew it was too late. The damage was done. In the following weeks, the true extent of the sabotage became clear. Former colleagues reached out secretly to tell me that Ethan and Connor were systematically dismantling my professional reputation. They implied I'd mismanaged projects, made promises the company couldn't keep, alienated key stakeholders. My name was removed from the company website. Projects I'd led were now attributed to the Harrison team. The sustainability initiatives I'd championed were being marketed as Ethan's brainchild, though they were being scaled back significantly. The financial strain began to hit hard. My savings, while substantial, weren't infinite. I'd always reinvested most of my bonuses back into company stock I now couldn't sell due to transfer restrictions. The severance offer remained unsigned on my counter. Accepting it meant validating their version of events, but pride wouldn't pay my mortgage. Industry contacts who'd once been eager to collaborate now wouldn't return my calls. The non-compete agreement prevented me from approaching any Harrison clients. My professional identity had been so thoroughly entwined with the family business that without it, I seemed to disappear. One evening, I drove past the West Side Commons site. The sign had been changed. No more sustainable urban living. Now it advertised luxury condominiums from the $800s. All my work, my vision, erased as if it had never existed. I pulled over and watched the darkened construction site, tears streaming down my face. This was the final evidence that everything I'd built was being dismantled, brick by brick, board by board. Not just my career, but my legacy. That night, I signed the severance agreement. Not because I accepted their version of events, but because I needed to survive long enough to rebuild. I mailed it the next morning, feeling like I was signing my own professional death certificate. When the check arrived, I couldn't bring myself to deposit it for days. It felt tainted, blood money to buy my silence and disappearance. But eventually, practical necessity won out over principle. The money would buy me time. And time was what I needed most, time to heal, to plan, and eventually, to rise again from the ashes of betrayal. By month 3 after the voicemail, I had hit rock bottom. I'd moved from my spacious apartment to a tiny studio in a less desirable neighborhood to conserve funds. The severance money was dwindling faster than I'd anticipated. Job interviews in the construction industry mysteriously fell through after initial enthusiasm. The Harrison name had become a liability rather than an asset. One rainy night, Portland has no shortage of those, I sat on the floor of my new apartment surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. I'd been drinking wine straight from the bottle, scrolling through old photos on my laptop. Projects I'd managed, team celebrations, family events at the office. My life's work reduced to digital memories and a few cardboard boxes. I reached a photo from the groundbreaking of the West Side Commons. My father's arm around my shoulders, both of us in hard hats, golden shovels in hand. His smile seemed genuine. Was he already planning to cut me out even then? Had anything in my professional life been real? In that moment of despair, I almost gave up completely. I considered leaving Portland, changing careers, reinventing myself somewhere no one knew the Harrison name. Maybe I could teach construction management at a community college in another state. Or switch to real estate. Or abandon the industry entirely. My phone rang, startling me. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but some desperate hope made me pick up. Mia Harrison. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Mia? It's Catherine Walsh. Catherine Walsh was the owner of Walsh Community Developments, a smaller firm focused on affordable housing projects. We'd collaborated on a joint venture 2 years earlier, a mixed-income apartment complex that had won several awards for innovative design within budget constraints. Catherine, this is unexpected. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your email bounces back, and your cell goes straight to voicemail. I hadn't been checking messages regularly, too many awkward conversations to navigate. Sorry about that. I've been transitioning. So I've heard. Industry gossip travels fast. She paused. Listen, I don't know exactly what happened at Harrison, and frankly, I don't care. What I do know is that when we worked together, you were the most competent, innovative project manager I'd ever encountered. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of my old professional confidence. Thank you. That means a lot right now. It's not just flattery, Mia. I have a proposition for you. We've been awarded a contract for a small community center in North Portland. Tight budget, challenging site, sustainability requirements. I immediately thought of you. Catherine, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I can't. My non-compete. I've had my lawyer review it. This wouldn't violate the terms. It's not a Harrison client. It's a completely different market segment, and you'd be a consultant, not an employee of a competitor. We could structure it carefully. The possibility of working again, of building something meaningful, was intoxicating. But fear held me back. I don't know, Catherine. I'm not sure I'm ready to jump back in. Take some time to think about it. The offer stands. We start preliminary design in 2 weeks. After we hung up, I stared at the phone in my hand. An opportunity when I'd thought all doors were closed to me. But did I have the courage to walk through? The next day brought another unexpected connection. An email from George Phillips, my father's original business partner who'd retired and sold his stake 15 years ago. He'd heard about my departure and wanted to meet. We met at his home, a modest house with an impressive workshop in the back where he still built custom furniture as a hobby. At 75, George remained sharp and direct. Your father's making the same mistake he made with me, he said, after minimal pleasantries. Pushing out the person who could take the company forward because he's afraid of change. George shared a history I'd never known. How he and my father had clashed over expansion plans. How my father had maneuvered to dilute George's ownership until selling made more sense than fighting. How their 40-year friendship had ended over business disagreements. Your father builds beautiful structures, Mia, but he tears down relationships with the same efficiency. He can't stand anyone challenging his vision, even when that vision has become outdated. As we talked, George revealed he had kept journals throughout his career, including the partnership with my father. He retrieved a box from his workshop and handed me several leather-bound notebooks. You might find some perspective in these. History has a way of repeating itself in family businesses. That night, I started reading George's journals. They detailed the early days of Harrison Construction, originally Phillips and Harrison Builders, including a strikingly familiar pattern. My grandfather, Thomas Harrison, had forced out his own brother in the family's previous construction business 30 years earlier, using similar tactics of isolation and accusations of disloyalty. It was a generational pattern. The Harrison men built businesses and burned bridges with equal dedication. The journals gave me something unexpected: distance. For the first time, I could see my situation not as a personal failure, but as part of a dysfunctional family pattern that preceded me. My father wasn't just betraying me, he was repeating behavior he'd learned from his own father. Understanding didn't erase the pain, but it helped me separate myself from it. This wasn't about my performance or my worth. It was about fear of change, fear of loss of control, fear of mortality. Fears that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the Harrison legacy of mistrust. The next morning, I called Catherine Walsh and accepted her consulting offer. Then I sat down at my small kitchen table with a notebook and began sketching out a business plan. Not for a construction company, the non-compete prevented that, but for a consulting firm specializing in sustainable building practices. Green Horizon Consulting would offer expertise in eco-friendly materials, energy-efficient design, and sustainable construction methods. I'd target smaller firms lacking in-house sustainability experts but wanting to compete in an increasingly green-conscious market. Firms like Catherine's. Starting over was terrifying. I had no clients beyond Catherine, limited capital, and a reputation that had been systematically undermined. But I had knowledge, experience, and now a driving purpose that went beyond family legacy. I registered the business name the next day. Created a simple website the day after. Ordered business cards with Mia Harrison, founder and principal consultant, printed in simple, professional font. Each small step rebuilt a piece of my shattered confidence. Catherine's Community Center project became my lifeline. I threw myself into it completely, researching innovative materials that could meet both sustainability goals and budget constraints. I developed alternatives to expensive systems using creative combinations of passive design elements. I worked harder than I ever had at Harrison, knowing this project would make or break my new venture. When we presented the final design to the community board, their enthusiastic approval felt like validation not just of my work, but of my professional identity beyond the Harrison name. One board member approached me afterward. "We've been trying to make this work for years, but the big firms either couldn't meet our budget or wouldn't prioritize our sustainability goals. You found a way to do both." His words were the first unequivocal professional praise I'd received since the voicemail. I realized I'd been holding my breath for months, waiting for someone to confirm I still had value without the Harrison backing. That evening, I walked through the construction site of what would become the Northside Community Center. Just plywood and concrete foundations now, but I could envision the finished building, solar panels that doubled as shade structures, rainwater collection feeding the community garden, reclaimed timber from a demolished warehouse forming the central gathering space. I placed my hand on a newly poured foundation wall, still slightly warm from the curing process. Everything needs a solid foundation, my father had taught me long ago. He'd been talking about buildings, but the lesson applied to life as well. I was pouring a new foundation now, not of concrete, but of integrity, independence, and resilience. For the first time since that coffee shop moment when my world collapsed, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. Not the future I'd planned, but perhaps the one I needed, a future I was building myself, one carefully placed brick at a time. 1 year after the voicemail that had shattered my world, I stood in a hotel ballroom at the Pacific Northwest Sustainable Building Awards. Green Horizon Consulting had been nominated for innovation in community-focused design for the Northside Community Center. The center had opened 2 months earlier to enthusiastic community response. We'd come in under budget and exceeded energy efficiency projections. Most importantly, the space had immediately become a vibrant hub for the neighborhood, exactly what we'd envisioned. When they announced, "And the winner is Green Horizon Consulting for the Northside Community Center," the applause felt like validation of the hardest year of my life. As I accepted the glass trophy, I scanned the audience out of habit, half expecting to see my father or brother. They weren't there, of course. Harrison Home Construction had stopped attending industry events focused on sustainability. My acceptance speech was brief. I thanked Catherine Walsh for taking a chance on me when others wouldn't. I acknowledged the community board for their trust and partnership. I dedicated the award to those who find themselves starting over, building new foundations when old ones crumble. After the ceremony, several small and mid-sized construction firm owners approached me about potential projects. Word had spread about what we'd accomplished at Northside with limited resources. My calendar filled with consultations. Green Horizon was thriving. I'd hired 2 junior consultants and was considering bringing on a project manager. We'd moved from my apartment to a small but proper office in a renovated warehouse. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had fired me from a company named after our family, and I had built a successful business named after a vision. It was during this period of professional redemption that news about Harrison Home Construction began circulating through industry channels. Their luxury condo conversion of what had been my West Side Commons project was facing serious problems. Cost overruns, quality issues, permit violations related to environmental commitments in the original approval. I took no pleasure in their struggles, but I wasn't surprised either. The Harrison approach had always been to promise big and figure out delivery later. Without someone detail-oriented managing operations, without me, those promises were becoming increasingly difficult to fulfill. Then came the call I'd both dreaded and anticipated for months. My mother's name on my phone screen late one evening. "Mia? Your father's had a heart attack." The world seemed to stop. Despite everything, he was still my father. "Is he?" "He's stable. They did emergency surgery. But it was serious, Mia. He's asking for you." I sat with that information for a long moment. "He fired me by voicemail, Mom. He let Ethan and Richard Maxwell destroy my reputation. He cut me out of my own family without even a conversation." "I know." Her voice cracked, "And I let it happen. I'll never forgive myself for that. But he's still your father, and he might not have much time left." The hospital room was dim when I arrived. My father looked small in the bed, tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. My mother sat beside him, holding his hand. Ethan was noticeably absent. Dad's eyes opened when I approached. Recognition, then something like shame flickered across his face. "Mia." His voice was weak. "You came. Mom said you asked for me." He nodded slightly. "I did something unforgivable to you. I didn't disagree or offer easy absolution." "Yes, you did." "I let fear drive me. Fear of losing control. Fear of the company changing too much. Fear of becoming irrelevant." He coughed, and Mom helped him sip water. "Richard played on those fears. Made me believe you were planning to push me out, change everything we'd built. I would never have done that. Everything I did was to strengthen the company you started. I know that now." He looked away. "Harrison Construction is in trouble, Mia. Serious trouble. Without you, we're not the same." Part of me wanted to savor this acknowledgement, this vindication. But it felt hollow. "I'm sorry to hear that. Truly. But I have my own company now. I've heard. Green Horizon. You're doing well." A ghost of pride crossed his face. "You're doing what I couldn't, evolving, adapting." We talked for nearly an hour. Not just about business, but about family. About patterns repeated through generations. About how fear of losing control had cost the Harrison men the very legacy they were so desperate to preserve. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. My father never explicitly apologized, and I didn't offer complete forgiveness. But we reached a kind of understanding, an acknowledgement of what had been lost and what might still be salvaged, not in business, but in family. As I was leaving, he said, "That message I left you. The voicemail. When you only replied, 'Understood,' that was the moment I first doubted what I'd done. You didn't beg, didn't argue, just accepted it with more dignity than I'd shown delivering the news." It wasn't acceptance, I told him. It was the only power I had left in that moment, to deny you the satisfaction of seeing me break. He nodded slowly. "You're stronger than any Harrison before you, Mia. You built something new from nothing. I've only ever known how to follow the path already laid." In the months that followed, our family began a cautious healing process. Mom and I renewed our weekly lunch dates. Dad and I spoke occasionally, mostly about neutral topics, as we carefully navigated our new relationship. Ethan eventually apologized after the Maxwell partnership imploded, leaving him to face the consequences of decisions he hadn't fully understood. Harrison Home Construction survived, though in a diminished form. They sold off the troubled West Side Commons project to a developer who, ironically, hired Green Horizon to consult on making it more sustainable. My father stepped down as CEO, taking on a chairman role with limited involvement in day-to-day operations. I declined offers to return to the family business. The bridges burned were too structural to be safely crossed again. But I did occasionally consult on specific Harrison projects when asked, a professional courtesy that satisfied both sides without reopening old wounds. 2 years after the voicemail, I stood at a different construction site, the groundbreaking for Green Horizons' first design-build project. We'd partnered with Catherine Walsh's firm to create affordable, sustainable housing for healthcare workers. The project represented everything I believed construction could and should be: community-focused, environmentally responsible, economically viable. As I pressed the ceremonial shovel into the dirt, I thought about foundations again. How they must be solid but also flexible enough to withstand shifting conditions. How sometimes the strongest structures rise from cleared ground rather than patched ruins. The voicemail that had devastated me had also, paradoxically, freed me. Freed me from the constraints of family expectations and traditional thinking. Freed me to build something that truly reflected my values rather than compromising to maintain peace. Freed me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed when the supports I'd relied on were suddenly removed. "You're out of the family business," my father had said. "Understood," I had replied. Not as surrender, but as the first word of a new chapter one would write myself. That single word had been a commitment to myself, to my values, to my vision. A promise that I understood not just what I had lost, but what I could still create. That I understood my worth extended beyond the Harrison name. That I understood life's most important foundation isn't built of concrete and steel, but of integrity, resilience, and the courage to begin again. Today, as I look out at the team wearing Green Horizon hard hats, I feel a profound gratitude for that painful lesson. In losing my inherited legacy, I found my authentic path. In being cast out, I found my way home to myself. If you've ever had to start over after betrayal, I hope my story gives you courage. Sometimes our greatest strength emerges only when everything familiar is stripped away. Sometimes the most beautiful structures rise from the ashes of what we thought we couldn't live without. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that survival, and even thriving, is possible after devastating loss. Leave a comment below about a time when you had to rebuild after something fell apart. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience and reinvention. And remember, sometimes understood isn't the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of a whole new dialogue with yourself about who you truly are and what you're capable of building.